Hi, everyone. This is Josie from OPWDD. We're just going to take a second to make sure everybody who needs to be here is here. Hopefully, everybody in the public can hear me. It looks like we have 38 people watching in on today's meeting.
Hello.
Hello.
This is Joanne Lampe. I can hear voices, but I don't see anybody, and I don't know what I'm doing. And I don't even know if I'm registered here or not.
Joanne, you are doing everything you need to do. There's nobody to see. As long as you can see on the screen where it says 2020 second quarter family support.
Yes.
That's all you're going to see today. So now you just get to hang out and listen and ask questions when you have them.
Okay, and if I want to...
Here.
So am I registered? Can you see I'm attending the meeting?
Yep, because you're talking and you're in the meeting. This is the meeting.
Okay. So we follow the agenda and look at this 2020 quarterly family support services meeting, right?
Yes, we're going to begin the meeting right now if you're ready.
Okay, if I need to speak, then I just hit the speak. Okay, I'm gonna get out of this. I don't know what this thing, administrative computer, I don't know what it is. Okay, ready.
Okay. Roger, would you like to start?
I am now going to unmute myself, which will make me more hearable. If I could just ask for folks who are not speaking to please mute, thank you. Because when we don't have the mute and somebody has a speakerphone, we get this wonderful feedback loop, which we've really just terrific. Welcome folks to our virtual Family Support Services Committee meeting. I know that obviously given everything that's happened over the last number of months in the state and in the country and the world, we're certainly not together in one place, and we're hoping that we'll be able to, to be together again soon. I wanted, working with the chair, with Margaret, thank you, Margaret. We developed the agenda, which is really 3 issues that were asked to be addressed. The first is really pandemic, COVID-related issues and service delivery during this period, and I assume looking forward. And the second is, fiscal issues. There was a request for some information and some discussion and dialogue around the current fiscal situation. And then the third item, which is more specific to this committee, family support services, et cetera, near the tail end of the discussion. So maybe just to launch into the first, I thought it would be helpful to give kind of a broad-based outline. It's impossible to do justice to just how much has gone on in the last number of months, how much work both OPWD staff, or nonprofit partners, or state operations staff have done to try to address. I guess unprecedented is an abused word, but it is certainly an unprecedented situation. Thought I would go backwards and just kind of walk a little bit about, what's happened over the last number of months, and then maybe as we're going through, if folks have specific questions, they can certainly raise their hand through the virtual hand raising, or try to put a word in, and I will try to keep attention to the chat box as well. But that takes some multitasking, so Josie, I'll ask for your assistance in that regard as well. So just to take us back to early March was when we first encountered COVID as part of New York's reality, as well as OPWDD's reality. And it was in early March when we activated our emergency management system. And I think we did a couple of things right at the off the bat that were very helpful. One was that we engaged our Office of Emergency Management. We went into a 7-day-a-week posture very early in March. We established a data tracking system through the Division of Quality Improvement. So we used our incident management systems and used them to create new categories of reporting around COVID-19, about infection, about quarantine and isolation, and so on. And that meant that very early on we were collecting data, which is of course very, very important in responding to the public health crisis. The other thing we did, once again early in March, was established a contact tracing effort. At the time, we made a decision to discontinue routine investigatory activity, and we were able to take about 80 internal affairs investigators and repurpose them as contact tracers and train them in that way. And then as we were looking at different services that maybe we weren't offering to the same degree, or administrative processes that were being suspended, we were able to build on that team. We, I think, had a couple of hundred people over the course who were able to perform contact tracing and to be able to be a resource for our state-operated services as well as our nonprofit partners as necessary. We established a 24-hour hotline so that we would be able to get in real time any concerns that were being raised out of the system. And then Leslie Fold, who was the Deputy Commissioner for Quality Improvement, became embedded in the Department of Health's Public Health group. And so that we had a feedback mechanism with her, with Jill Pettinger and Abiba Kindo, to be able to quickly and rapidly get the advice of the Department of Health as we needed to confront situations as they arose, which is also, I think, of critical importance, because prior to the current pandemic, having a public health function at OPWDD was not something we had. One of the flexibilities that was developed was we authorized our providers to develop alternative residential facilities. There were two types of such facilities. One, which would be a facility that was available for individuals being served by a particular provider if the provider felt that they couldn't be safely cohorted within the group home in which they're living, that there were alternative sites that the provider could develop, and that was required a review through a safety plan process, and they could take a site they controlled, like a DAHAB site, and make it into a residence temporarily. We also helped providers establish what would be temporary emergency residences for people who might be, living at home, or living at home and go to the hospital and don't have a safe discharge plan. Developed over 100 of those between those two types of residences, and that was also a key strategy. The last piece of the puzzle was working with our federal partner, which is Center for Medicare and Medicaid Services, CMS, to develop an Appendix K, which is an emergency crisis response mechanism, and that was a piece that both allowed for some considerable flexibility in the way that providers were authorized to render services, very significant expansion in modalities of service to address the emergency while, not obviously, while minimizing face-to-face contact. And then also when we made the decision in mid-March, which I think you're all familiar with, to suspend day programming, that gave, through this Appendix K, the ability to continue payments to day services providers, while also making payments to residential providers who were in fact rendering the services during the day. If you check the OPWDD website, you'll find, I think, well over 60 guidance documents that have issued addressing key issues, early containment guidance, when we suspended visitation to the group homes. We've now, of course, resumed that visitation, but there are guidelines around how that visitation should occur in a way that is safe and for both the individuals and the staff and the visitors. As I mentioned previously, we did suspend those day programs in mid-March. We've now, of course, authorized them to reopen, once again, subject to their creation of a safety plan that would demonstrate how they will operate safely. Been a very important focus throughout the crisis that we communicate. In March, we were hosting daily, 7 days a week stakeholder discussions with a variety of stakeholders. I know have been communicating regularly through Margaret as the chair of the committee and to the rest of the committee, and I'm very grateful, Margaret. I would be looking at you right now and saying thank you. I know you do an excellent job of sharing that information that's shared at these stakeholder engagements to make sure that we're getting as much current information out to folks as we possibly can. It's an important stakeholder strategy, but it's an important public health strategy as well. And right now we've reduced the frequency of those discussions to every other week. We went down, as the crisis for now has subsided, we would be communicating less because there's just simply less information to share on a day-to-day basis. Certainly, if there's another wave, we would be looking to expand that communication. We did launch a new website in the midst of the crisis. We established a new communications tool through this a new listserv to improve our ability to get information out. I would say that if you're not on that listserv, I would recommend that you go to the OPWDD website and please sign up. And we are on, in this current moment, we track every new infection that's reported to us. We have been making regular visits through our quality assurance teams, through DQI, where we see any issues that may be about providers that may have challenges in implementing the guidance that we've put out there about containment and quarantine. And, we monitor on a daily basis the data that comes in, and in an effort to get ahead of every possible issue we can get ahead of. Fortunately now, just like the rest of the state, we're at I think a good place in terms of a very low level of new infection that's occurring. None would be better, of course. And so we're, I think, extremely pleased by where we are right now, but we're taking absolutely nothing for granted. And we continue to every single day monitor what's happening. So let me just pause there. I gave, I think, a decent 30,000 foot of where we've been and where we are. And I want to give an opportunity then for members of the committee to, and we do have a number of members of our senior staff on this call / meeting. If there are specific areas that would be helpful to dig into more deeply. Is anybody?
Roger? Yeah, Roger.
Hi.
It's Margaret.
Yeah. Hi.
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 That was a good overview, but I'd like to go back to some specific questions that had been asked by the members about 100%. The reopening. Okay.
Yep.
One of the people wanted to know what the parameters are for day habs reopening. Can agencies do what they want? Are they held to certain standards? Do they have to open? Do they have to open within a certain time period? Stuff like that. Also, if families opt not to send their children back to day habs, will they lose the opportunity? Will they lose their place, so to speak? And I think they want a clearer idea of how safety precautions will be put into place. Obviously, we're talking about masks, but especially the 6 feet distancing requirement. How is that supposed to be handled? Those were some of the questions people wanted to have addressed.
Got it. So let me just make sure I took that down correctly. So one is are there guidelines? Two is are they sort of optional or mandatory? And third is what happens if a family doesn't send their individual choose to make that choice?
Yes.
And then there's a fourth that I missed. I'm sorry.
I think that was just the practicalities of social distancing in day habs.
Yeah.
And I take it we're going to get to the retainer day stuff when we do the fiscal, right?
Yeah, we can certainly go there then, or I mean,
Okay.
these things, fiscal and service delivery aren't necessarily separable issues in the sense of you have to pay for the service delivery.
Right.
So in terms of, and let me just ask, I'm having a hard time seeing because we have the meeting participants and the meeting attendees. Leslie, are you on the line, and or Abiba?
Abiba's going to be here. She's just running a little late. We have Jackie Best until then.
Okay, great. So let me then address the first couple options things. So we do have guidelines that were issued to all of the providers. They are on the OPWDD website as well, and basically they require a provider that wishes to reopen its day program to fill out basically a reopening plan, a reopening safety plan. I'm forgetting the exact term, but and to submit it to OPWDD. Those plans are not subject to our approval, but are subject to submission prior to the reopening. We are, in fact, looking at those plans to make sure that we have they've addressed the correct components that need to be in such a plan, which are the things that you would imagine, having to do with how are the public health standards going to be met in the particular program reopening, and to the degree to which we're finding through this the program certification through DQI, looking at them to the degree to which we're finding areas where we would have concern about not following the guidelines, we would be addressing those directly with the providers. I'm aware of some circumstances where we have done that. They're not optional, they're mandatory. And one of the reasons for the structure that we have is, the provider is going to have and the provider could be a nonprofit, or the provider could be a state operations, a day program, which is also must submit such a plan. They're going to have a much better idea both of the physical components of the particular location. Where are the elevators, where are the rooms, where are the bathrooms, how, and the individuals in terms of their abilities to to cohort successfully and so on. So that's something where I know that many providers are moving, I would call it in a deliberate fashion, in meaning that they're erring on the side of caution in terms of their in terms of their planning there. But it's certainly not optional. One could not open a day hab program without having created such a safety plan. And in terms of a family perhaps making the decision that at the current moment they don't feel comfortable with their loved one attending day programming, I have to confess some ignorance about the idea of a spot being reserved. I don't know, Jackie, if you're representing RO, whether you have a sense on that question or whether that's something that we haven't yet resolved.
The WebEx, Josie, have you unmuted her?
Jackie, we can hear you.
All right, so the question is, to the extent that the family does not want to return their loved one to the day hab program, did I hear that correctly?
Yes, and the question would be at some subsequent time, maybe they would want to go, but there's concern about losing one spot. And
okay.
That's just not a question. Yep.
Okay, so our due process requirements are still in existence. So if a family did not feel comfortable with the safety precautions that a day hab provider have put into place, they do have the ability to make the decision to not send their loved one back. They would not lose their opportunity in doing so. So that should not be a concern.
So in other words, if someone were to be threatened with losing their spot, they would be it would be required that they would get a notification that that spot was going to be someone was going to be discharged from that program, and the family would have an opportunity to contest that through our existing due process procedures. So we have some protections built in to that. Is that a fair paraphrase,
Correct.
Jackie?
Correct. And not only that, but if there's anything being communicated to families from the day hab providers that is concerning, or if they're getting the message that they may lose that opportunity, that should certainly be elevated to the local regional office, and OPWCD would then reach out and look into the situation.
Thanks, Jackie. And then the last question, Margaret, that you posed was a question having to do with practicalities, and I'm not sure what specifically is being asked there. You're muted if you're talking.
No, I can't get out. There.
Okay.
I think I got it. Okay. Okay.
Yeah, we've got you now. Thank you.
Yes, it was the practicalities. Also, there's one more thing which I had forgotten to mention, and that was not related to the day habs, but to visitation questions.
Okay.
At the time that I sent out the survey, people said they still knew of individuals who were who were not permitted to leave their residence at all, not to go for a community walk or anything. And I don't know if that's still the case with the opening up of visitation or not, but can you address whether it is the case and what to do?
Yeah, I mean, I'm not aware, but I can't, I can't say that my lack of awareness is proof that it's not in existence. Obviously, it's a big state. But I'm not aware of such a practices now that we've both visitation as well as the community outings guidance has been rescinded or issued differently. person-centered planning, community integration, the hallmarks of our system continue to be the hallmarks of our system. So we would be very concerned if there were, in the current moment, obviously we were in a different moment, when we had the orders in place. But in the current moment, if there were still blanket restrictions on, the ability of individuals to, spend time in the community, experience visitation with family members, et cetera, those would be practices we would want to know about immediately. And once again, I think that the best place would be elevating that into the regional office in the relevant region, because that would be allow for an immediate response back to the provider that was engaged in those practices. Good. Jackie, did I miss anything there?
No, that's accurate.
Thank you.
And one more thing, if I may. I presume that for the family support type programs like recreation and overnight respite, anything that's a group program is still not going to open, not going to reopen, but things like ComHab or ResHab or respite that are one-on-one would be allowed to open. Is that correct?
Yeah.
Well, I think that's right. I mean, it sort of depends. There are some specifics with regard to specific types of programs. So, for example, we've had some outreach around camp respite, which sometimes is in FSS funded, sometimes it's waiver, sometimes it's a little bit of both. Mm-hmm. We have a Department of Health directive around camp, which is equally applicable to a funding source through OPW to DF camp. Overnight respite's kind of an interesting issue because, freestanding respite on the waiver side was never suspended. It was, as a practical matter, not occurring because, staffing issues, combating the virus, families weren't going anywhere, so they had no necessarily a need for freestanding respite. A number of reasons why that would, but that program was never suspended. So it depends. Your general presumption is correct, which is to say that those programs which track, that are community-based day service type things are permitted to operate. Those things that are more similar to things that continue to be suspended would not be. But it takes some drilling down because it kind of depends upon which flavor of respite you're talking about, for example.
Okay. Thank you, Roger.
Roger, this is Abiba. I'm on. I don't know if you can hear me.
We can hear you now. Thank you. I just got a note from Josie that there were some technical troubles, but I'm glad that we solved them.
Perfect. Thank you.
So I don't know if the committee has further, I'll call them, pandemic-related questions. I know you were trying to move us towards the Appendix K, Margaret, but I just wanted to, see if there were any other questions that folks may have before we move in that direction.
Hi, this is Gail Pato. I actually have two questions. I'm pretty sure I know one of the answers, but I'd love to just hear it confirmed. In our area, we received some questions about the very flexible and wonderful decision that many families were impacted by, allowing students basically to receive services during school hours during the spring when school didn't look the same. However, in the fall, we've gotten questions if that flexibility will still be extended or if that will no longer be an option.
Okay, so that's a good question. We have not yet resolved that. I think we were looking, when we offered that flexibility in the spring, which obviously was a deviation from the normal, rules around the hours of service delivery. That was in a context where certainly school wasn't occurring anywhere, right? And so we allowed for, as long as the number of hours didn't increase, there was that flexibility. we have that on the list of issues that we need to imminently resolve, but I don't yet have a guidance on that. I will take your comment to be a recommendation that we continue that flexibility into the fall. Is that fair, Gail?
Yeah, I know many families would truly appreciate that because several of the schools have all different plans, some of which have students going every other day or half days. It all depends on where they go. So yeah, that would be something that many people would appreciate.
Yeah, and we kind of wanted to see, you know, we're you know, where's the policy making on school before we make our, you know, we make our policy. Now that I think we at least have a decent sense of, you know, the statewide policy, as well as some sense of how that's being implemented in, you know, on the ground, as it were, that can give us the context for, you know, a policy decision on our side, which we really couldn't have done a few weeks ago before we really had an understanding of, you know, where that is. But we do understand that, and it's high on the list of things we need to resolve in the next little bit.
Great. The other question I had, I'm not sure if someone on this call can answer it, but it actually is relative to the pandemic and specific to self-direction. Many of the camps that people typically attend had to obtain DOH authorization to be considered a camp for certain types of reimbursement. Our understanding is that several camps did not renew this authorization due to the pandemic, and then provided some virtual camp options, which have been very helpful to families. The question is, will families still be able to access their budget for reimbursement for these experiences without that DOH authorization due to the specific circumstances everyone's experiencing currently?
I certainly have no idea. I don't know whether that's something Abiba. Thank you.
Yeah, that's something that we would need to look into, Gail. I don't know if you can push in at least one or two specifics to us so that we can look into that. Usually without the Department of Health authorization, it certainly, you know, puts us in a interesting position in terms of paying for services that are not authorized, but I would want to understand the specifics of that. So if you can push that into me, that would be extremely helpful.
Will do. Thank you very much.
You're welcome.
Sandra Mooney had a question.
Yeah, this is it's kind of a strange question because we're hopefully we don't go back into a another shutdown. But if there is, what's going to happen with OMRDD at that point? I mean, because if we shut down again, what are we looking at?
So I'm trying to understand the question, like what would another shutdown look like if we were in a crisis mode?
Yeah, and what would that do to OMRDD period in general?
Meaning what? In terms of our ability, OPWD's ability to serve individuals,
right.
In terms of, well, I mean, I think one of the things that I'm very proud of is that early as we were implementing our emergency management protocols, one of the things we did through our emergency management group was track our business processes, in the sense of we want to be very, very confident that anything that was an essential business process for particular families, for individuals, continued. So one of the things we were able to do throughout the pandemic, you know, was pivot so that families and individuals did have a way to access a regional office staff, to access fiscal staff, to be able to continue to get those services. The things that we were not doing were by choice, in essence, you know, so we made a choice not to engage in routine survey activity for all the obvious reasons about, you know, that would, the challenges that would pose in the middle of a pandemic. So in the event, and obviously I'm knocking wood right now that, you know, that we don't go back there, that we needed to kind of go more back into a crisis mode. We have actually well documented everything we did, what its impact was, what kind of technology we deployed. We have that in an overall pandemic plan that we've pieced together. And so, you know, I think we did an excellent job back in March of improvising and building solutions in new ways that we, you know, that we hadn't thought about previously, because it was, you know, it was a new experience. If we go back there, I think we now go back to crisis. We're going to have a much better playbook. We're going to know what interventions we undertook, and we have some sense of which ones were kind of more useful and which ones were less so. So I feel confident, as much as one can be confident, that we'll be, you know, kind of be ready to address, you know, this uncertain future that we're facing.
Thank you.
So,
Margaret Raymond, do you have a?
thank you so much.
Yes, I do. Can you hear me?
Yes, we can.
Oh, okay, good. My comment question has to do with self-direct. I know that OPWDD had stopped the budgets. They kind of froze everybody's budget, and if your PRA wasn't fully utilized and then you wanted to put in more staffing and use some more of the budget, we couldn't do that. Do you see that coming to a close where budgets can be fully accessed? The PRA?
Yeah, Roger, I can respond. This is Abiba.
Thank you.
I can respond to that. So, yeah, we essentially noted to folks that as long as the total service authorization did not change, then folks could certainly submit their cost-neutral budget amendments. And so we had put in place some flexibilities that Roger had outlined early on in his overview at the beginning of the meeting. And because of those flexibilities, felt that it made sense not to allow folks at the time to be able to access the entire PRA, recognizing that, you know, if you needed to increase ComHab, then respite would come down. We're currently reviewing that and should be able to provide folks with an update near term.
Okay, thank you.
You're welcome.
Are there any more questions on the topic of service delivery during pandemic? Okie dokie. I think the next topic was fiscal issues. I know that we were planning on having Kevin Valencius present, but unfortunately he's out ill. I don't know if we have a representative from the fiscal group that was able to join us. If not, I will do my best.
Roger,
Who's that?
this is Joanne Howard. I'm on the call.
Thank you so much, Joanne. It's just hard. When people speak, their name pops up as one of the, now I can see you. Thank you so much. So I don't know, Margaret, if you had specific questions, or would it be helpful to start with an overview?
I can't unmute.
You've done it now. Oh, you just muted yourself again.
Oh, there I am. No.
Yeah.
Okay. Oh, it keeps flipping back. Can you hear me?
We can, thank you.
Yeah.
Okay, good. Sorry. I think that a number of members didn't understand what the retainer day payment was designed for and what it accomplished. And they were wondering what happened to the money that wasn't spent on the day program. So that needs to be cleared up. So especially the retainer day, but the other Appendix K provisions as well, and the ComHab R. Joanne, if you could do that. It's good to hear you, Joanne.
Yeah, why don't I start and you can fill in the details, Joanne, if that's okay.
Okay.
So starting with the Appendix K, which was submitted around March 8th. And just for context, that has a 6-month life, which expires September 7th. And then we have submitted to CMS for a 6-month extension, which would take us to, call it March 6th or 7th of 2021. And under federal policy, the maximum extent of an Appendix K, which is an emergency amendment to the waiver, is 1 year. So that would be the end. We did a couple of things so first of all, with respect to the retainer day program, we allowed for day services providers to be paid for the purposes of retaining staff. So that was a payment made that is not contingent on the provision of services. For the first month, it was 100% of revenue, and then for subsequent months, that was 80% with an opportunity to earn 20%. Kate, am I right? Was it 80 and 20, or is it 75 and 25? I keep messing that up.
80 and 20.
Thank you so much. And then there was a document that issued near the end of June. So the timing here is important. We started the program in early March, and then federal CMS issued a guidance document at the end of June. And that document said that the maximum extent of an Appendix K retainer payment would be 90 days, or as they put it, 3 consecutive 30-day periods. And the way you counted was, since day programming is a 5-day-a-week service, you could kind of skip count the weekends. So that ended up from March 8th or so on, and with a sunset of the program July 21st, 2020. So that happened 3 or so weeks ago. And so once again, that's a payment that has been made to providers of day services for the purposes of retaining staff. We have been looking at what options may be available to provide some additional assistance to day services providers beyond the expiration of this day retainer program. That's something where we haven't yet been able to settle on an approach. We're going to.
We've lost Roger's voice.
You can't hear me? Can you hear me better now? Hello? Can people hear me or no?
Clear.
I can hear you, Roger.
Oh, I just got a message. We're having problems connecting to the network, so that's wonderful for me. We're looking at options for how to support day services providers beyond the retainer program, and CMS has made it very, very clear that when they said total of 90 days, they meant
Roger's gone again.
Can you hear me again?
This is Debbie. I can hear you clear. Please.
I can hear you.
Okay, because somebody keeps saying, people are saying I'm gone again, and some maybe, I don't know. Trying my best. So we're looking at alternatives right now. We've just recently engaged a CMS on some of those alternatives. Not yet ready to kind of talk about what those look like, because there are going to be some additional discussions and about what options we think make sense, what options their federal partners think make sense, and so we're kind of in that stage. We hope to have some further answers in the next few days to a week, but that's dependent upon successful discussions with CMS. So that's really the retainer program. In terms of ComHab-R, that was a flexibility that was authorized in the Appendix K because while folks who live in residence are not in fact attending day program because of the suspension at the time, it was in fact, and for some individuals continues to be the fact that they're receiving services in the residence. So it seemed to us to be, fair that those providers would be compensated for that, and that's where the ComHab-R payment resides. There are risks in such a program that you would be paying, provider A for a retainer payment, which is a payment to sustain revenue for provider A, while at the same time paying provider B, who is in fact rendering the services in the home. At the same time, I think your question originally, Margaret, made the assumption that there would be a diminution in overall service delivery or payment for services. The fact of the retainer program kind of offsets that. So for families who have individuals who may be living at home, that individual may not be attending attending program, but that program may in fact be getting a payment of somewhere between 80 and 100% of the retainer payment. The challenge we have is one of the flexibilities that was offered to providers as part of the pandemic response is more flexibility in the amount of time they have to get their bills in to the Medicaid system. At the current moment, we really don't have, and Joanne, that was true as of last week, and Joanne, contradict me if it's not true as of this moment, a good sense of whether the combination of ComHab-R and retainer as unanticipated expenditures versus non-spending on services that were not provided. What does that equation look like? And, did we spend more or did we spend less in the aggregate? We don't yet really have the answer to that question since these interventions all kind of came relatively quickly and the claiming may not have caught up. Joanne, is that fair that we still don't have really that equation?
You're correct, Roger. We don't have those numbers at this point in time.
So, Margaret, I tried to package it in a way that made sense to me, and I'm hopeful that it made sense to you. You're muted again. There, you're unmuted. Good.
Oh, okay. Thank you. I'm having trouble with that today. Yes, that was very helpful. Thank you, Roger.
Okay. Is there anything else in the topic of fiscal issues that folks wanted to raise at this moment?
Well, there was the issue of the impending budget cuts.
Sure.
Could we do that?
Sure.
There was the 20% thing, and now there are the cuts to residential.
Yep.
Where do we stand with
Yep.
all that, and what would happen if we are
understood? So
yeah.
Got it. So I think there's a couple of three things. So I think first to distinguish between the enacted budget and the assumptions built into that. So that was the budget that was enacted for 120, which sort of in normal times, that defines our fiscal picture for as I think people are aware, the state fiscal year is in April to March. So the 2021 fiscal year started April 1 and is predicated on the budget that first was proposed by the executive and then then passed upon and enacted by the legislature. So in that budget, we had, I think, two major actions. One was a reduction to care coordination organizations, and then a second was a reduction to, I'll just call them HCBS providers, or providers, because CCOs are also providers. And so the expectation upon enactment of that budget was that we would certainly go ahead and implement the necessary changes to accomplish that. In the case of, and also in the good news on the budget, there was the 1/1/20 and the 4/1/20. I'll call them Be Fair to Direct Care, or Be Fair to, but there's some clinical, but those wage increases that had been built in to the budget. So those were maintained while other actions were contemplated. We published in late May in the state register the federal public notice, actually two federal public notices, one having to do with the CCO action, which requires a state plan amendment, and the second, which is the waiver action, which requires a waiver amendment. We OPWDD conduct and manage the public comment process for waiver actions, where state plan actions it's managed by the Department of Health. And then there are some differences in timing in terms of when the actual text was published. So I'll focus for the moment on the waiver action. We proposed as a mechanism for achieving the necessary fiscal savings two, I think, major actions. One, the elimination of the occupancy factor, which is an adjustment that is made to provide payments to providers who have a vacancy in their residential component. The way that has worked is it can be up to 5% of sort of unearned revenue to that residential provider. We also proposed elimination of the reduction of payments for retainer and therapeutic leave payments to 50%. We did receive a lot of public comment. We have looked at that. We are currently evaluating that. There's the overarching challenge is that we do need to achieve the fiscal savings that's contemplated in the enacted budget as part of that. So whatever kind of final determinations are made, there will need to be actions that are taken to to accomplish that aim. And I will say, having reviewed the public comment, there were a lot of concerns about the proposed action, but not a lot of alternatives that were offered to achieve the similar fiscal relief for the state budget. So the 1/1/20 and the 4/1/20 rate increases, I believe, are imminent. I believe, once again, certainly there has been plenty of feedback from providers that they would like a more timely issuance of such rate adjustments. But those I have been recently advised are imminent. So providers will be seeing those increases associated with support for, for the direct care and I guess clinical as well, wage increases. So in terms of, forward-looking, and you mentioned the 20%, at this point, OPWDD has not taken action. We're aware that certain sister agencies have taken action, particularly with regard to state aid that is provided to counties and have effectuated a withhold of certain payments. Certainly not the expert in what payments those are or how the mechanism works. I do know that at this point, OPWDD has not taken such actions. And these are really actions, were we to undertake them, that would be intended to withhold payment as a cash management exercise. But we have not taken any such action at this point. So let me pause there. I think that was a overview of the key items you pinged, Margaret.
Roger, I'm not sure whether people understood what the vacancy factor is and why it matters. And I'm not sure that people understood about therapeutic leave, what it is and why that matters. Could you kind of break it down a little bit more for people?
Sure. And so the mechanics are that if a residential, and I'll use simple math because that's the kind I can do. If a provider had 100 residential opportunities, but had only 95 individuals residing in those 100 opportunities, our current methodology would compensate that provider as if they had 100 individuals. So at the end of the day, there would be a 5% enhancement to revenue for that provider. If they had 90 individuals out of the 100, once again, I'm making my math easy on myself, they would be compensated only for 5%, meaning they would get up to 95%. If they had 97 individuals, they would get 3%. They wouldn't get 102%. So it is an adjustment to provider revenue based upon vacancy, and that is an expenditure. And so, a revenue from a provider standpoint is expenditure on behalf of the state. That is an expenditure of, and Joanne, please help me here, of about all shares, meaning federal, state, and local, about $250 million a year of expenditure for what is in essence the not providing services. Is that about the right number, Joanne?
I believe you're correct.
So no, and that breaks down to, and once again, approximate numbers, about $100 million of state expenditures to achieve that $250 million of federal, state, and local, because OPWDD benefits from a local share as well when we're looking at Medicaid expenditure. So the other possibility to achieve that level of savings would have been a 2% across the board, once again using round numbers, across the board rate cut, and it struck us as better to move to limit reimbursement for what is in essence not providing services than to be taking an approach that would be an across the board cut, whether services were for services actually being provided. Certainly appreciate the perspective, which has been vociferously expressed through many channels, that none of the above was the preferred action, but that's not one of the available options given the budget.
Could I just add a little perspective from the family point of view? During the pandemic, we lost, I don't know what the current number is, but the last number I remember was we had 444 fatalities. So those were beds, 90% of those were from beds in certified residences. And during the pandemic, it was very, very, very difficult, if not impossible, for providers to refill those beds with other people who might need it because of the difficulty of, having visits and overnight visits and screening people in person during the height of the virus. So a lot of beds remained empty and still are empty in residences. And providers didn't have a solution at hand. And so they are losing a very significant amount of money through this action. And that's why people have been very upset about it.
Well said, Margaret.
Thank you.
Commissioner?
So thanks, Josie. So Margaret, I would ask you what we asked everyone, which is, would you prefer a 2% across the board cut, which would include family support services, self-directed services, residential services, day program services, and literally everything we offer, as opposed to a targeted reduction specifically directed at what we believe was the production of services. It's not that we wanted to make a cut. We had to make a cut. It was announced during the budget hearings in my discussion with Senator Carlucci. We reconsidered whether it was advisable to make a 2% across the board and affect everyone, or to target payments that did not have an impact on individuals. So I would ask you right now, what would you prefer, one or the other, knowing that neither one is palatable?
And Ted, if I could just add to that for a second, we do have the opportunity to fill beds. That's never been. I understand there's a practical, there's a practical limitation, which is the availability and desire of providers to do it. But I do believe that our administrative processes continue, our CRO processes continue throughout the pandemic. So there's an opportunity to mitigate the risk, right, if you will, of revenue loss by delivering the services. That makes sense, Ted.
Yeah.
Josie, it's Margaret. I'm having terrible trouble unmuting myself. Can you keep me unmuted somehow? Because I would like to respond.
I haven't been muting you, Margaret. I've kept you unmuted.
Okay, but it's taken me like 3 minutes to get unmuted this time. The problem is when we talk about service, I don't have an answer. I admit that. I don't have an answer as to what would be preferable, because that's not my business. I don't understand the fiscal intricacies of service provision, and I would turn to the providers for an answer to that question as to what would be less harmful across the board. But I do want to say that the notion that services weren't provided, it is not entirely applicable here, because when you have an empty bed, you don't cut staffing. You don't cut any of your expenses, your utilities or anything like that. The only thing maybe you're not spending on is food for that person, but all the other expenses remain constant. So the fear is that with the day providers losing money, with the end of the retainer day payments, and with the residential providers being heavily penalized for the occupancy factor, that we're going to start losing services and losing agencies and losing staff, and the result is going to be very, very serious for families and individuals. That's the concern. And I don't have a solution, but I don't think that I should be required to come up with one as a parent.
Margaret, and just so you know, we did the question the commissioner is posing. We did pose to the providers, and that I don't know that there was a good alternative. I mean, I've literally read the public comments I didn't read the form letters, but I've read the other ones, and I think I can accurately say that there wasn't a comment that I saw that came up with an alternative, and we tend not to look at if viable alternatives don't include things like we'll cut somebody else's budget, right? That's rhetorical, not real, right? So, anywho,
but
any other?
Some services
Go ahead,
are
Margaret.
less critical than others. Some services are less critical than others. Obviously, residential is extremely critical. So are day services. Maybe reimbursement, family reimbursement isn't as critical. I don't know. But I think to look at an across the board cut is not necessarily the right answer either. I mean, I think you need to do it by how you need to take into account the essential factor.
Yeah, well, I think that, we have a limited number of you're choosing amongst bad options in essence, right? You're not.
Right, but it's like elections, some are less bad than others.
I will not be drawn into that discussion. So any other, and I just want to, cautionary note, just because I think we're leaving the fiscal issues topic. We are aware is that, when I said, we don't currently have any, other actions that we've initiated. I think the state of New York has been very effective in its communication publicly that we are facing a quite extraordinary fiscal situation, certainly unprecedented in living memory, and so I don't know at this point what other actions may be required. But I didn't want to, fail to indicate that, if the situation is as bad, it seems unlikely that, an agency with a significant, a budget and footprint as OPWDD will be unimpacted. But at this point, I don't have any specifics, and I don't want to say, run for the hills, be fearful. But I feel like it's an act of honesty to say that, I'm not sure the bad news is over. That's the point. So with that really incredibly cheery segue, I would move maybe to FSS specifically. And, Margaret, is it helpful for me to articulate some of the kind of the committee thinking on the DDAC more generally? Is that a helpful framing? Did you want to do that? Did you not want to do that at all?
Well, I can tell you the comments that I submitted to you. I can review those, and then you can address them as you see fit, if that would be helpful.
Sure.
All right. So one was, during several previous meetings, we've heard that the state is looking to convert many FSS programs to waiver programs. What will happen with families that are not in the waiver program or are not eligible for waiver but are still in need of services? That was mostly what the question was, and the rest of it was, what will happen to family support services in the future? Is this going to be phased out and just have waiver programs?
Right. So there's a couple of, those are good questions. So let me try to address it. So one of the things that was in the budget that is some savings with state dollars programs. So there will be, I believe it's a few $1 million, Joanne. I don't know if you have the exact number. That would need to be saved from the family support services program. Certainly, if in the event that there are further budgetary actions that need to be undertaken, I can't say whether, FSS would be subject to, but just to give a sense of the universe, we spend about, $400 million, round numbers, on state-only expenditures, meaning ones where we don't draw a federal match, of which, once again, round numbers, around $50 million is family support services. Those types of expenditures need to be looked at in the context of the larger budget, simply because when we take a waiver action, 30 cents of savings on a state budget achieves $1 decline in revenue for providers. So it is a more costly action, if you will, because by removing state expenditure, we lose that federal share and the local share as well. So that is, that's something that doesn't have a current action, but is subject to review. I think also we are looking at, actively looking at our waiver more generally, in terms of, one element is the adjustments we made on a crisis basis to afford more flexibilities. We're taking a look at that in the context of the larger waiver, permanent waiver, to see whether or not we may wish to extend those flexibilities into the future. And we also continue to see a quite extraordinary demand for services. I believe we had about 6,000 people knocking on our door newly last year. The pandemic, I don't know that has changed the fact that people continue to, age into adult services, to continue to require services. And so we're looking kind of throughout the organization about our capacity as a system to support those individuals with the limited resources that are there. So I don't know that we have a clear answer at this point. I think that our thinking is going to take us into the fall, and were we to contemplate moving towards more waiver reliance or different waiver reliance, that would be something that we would be engaging folks on, and kind of figuring out what makes the most sense. We don't have a plan to execute that at the current moment.
There's a question in the chat.
So we're going to go, Kathleen Nowak has a question or comment, I guess, on therapeutic days. We can't hear you if you're talking, Kathleen. There you go. You're still muted. I can see it. Now you're unmuted. I'm sorry, we can't hear you if you're speaking, Kathleen. We still can't hear you, Kathleen. If you can type and you want to throw your comments into the chat room, or I I don't know where it's showing is unmuted on our end, so I'm not sure where the barrier is.
It could be the computer is not using the mic.
I see. Yeah, it's not anything we can do on our side, Kathleen.
This is Josie. My advice would be to disconnect your audio and try to reconnect it. If you go up to the top under communicate, it'll say audio connection and you can click there.
So while we're waiting for Kathleen, hopefully to be able to connect her audio to us, is there any other questions or comments, Margaret, you or others may have?
The only other thing that I have from my list from the members was the future of the statewide Family Support Services Committee, which we know is enacted in law. So
yeah,
we know it will
so
continue.
I think it will continue. I think that one of the things we're trying to do with the larger DDAC, which has had, committees, both standing and ad hoc, and I certainly heard quite a bit of frustration from various members of that body that they felt that they were kind of engaging in perpetual committee activity without a sort of an end in sight. My recommendation to them, and they seem to be working towards that, is that a committee ought to, have a question or questions that it wishes to, to research. And then at the last DDAC meeting, several of the committees did make formal recommendations to the DDAC as a whole, which the DDAC then adopted as recommendations of that body, and with a request, which we intend to adhere to, that we develop as OPWD response. One of the committees was Housing Committee, and they had certain, ideas that they thought merited attention, some of which may be more programmatic, some of which may, of course, require fiscal investments, et cetera. So I would suggest, once again, it's entirely up to the committee itself how it wishes to conduct itself, but that if there are areas where the FSS statewide committee would like to, offer recommendations with respect to the FSS program, that, and then sort of demand a response out of OPW, that would be, I think, productive and consistent with how other, other committees have begun to conduct themselves. Of course, you can choose not to do that as well. It's entirely up to you. But I would say, yeah, absolutely. To the fundamental point, yes, it will be a continuing committee. And if it chooses to do so, it can certainly put together, analyses and report. We would like to see the following improvement in the FSS program. The following reasons, kind of, that would be helpful. Kathleen, I'm showing you as unmuted and connected. Let's see if we got it to work this time. It seems like a no. I'm really sorry that you can't make the comment. I don't know if you can maybe just send an email if the comment and make sure to share it with Josie. That would be great. I apologize. We just can't hear you. Gail.
Hi there. I just wanted to make a suggestion or comment, since you just said that would be a recommendation. I've received some input from a couple of different families that, everybody expects and is bracing for some sort of cut to FSS services. You have been incredibly transparent about that all year. Certainly, we appreciate that. The recommendation or the request that I came across was how that decision making is made. The request was that individual regions, if they're experiencing a cut, get to work with their regional office on identifying the areas in which that would best be or be the most appropriate based on the needs of the people in that region. So do you expect that OPWDD will be able to extend that partnership in that manner to get the input of the stakeholders and the individuals receiving services about cuts, not just in a public forum, but maybe through the DDROs working on a more local level?
I honestly hadn't given consideration. If I've heard that recommendation previously, I didn't hear it well enough, so I can't give you an off-the-cuff answer to that. I think the way we were looking at it was more categorical in the sense of, one ought to avoid duplication. Care management is the one that sticks in my head, right? That we have a very robust care management function, and where is the state-only care management function? Let me take that back, Joanne. I don't know if you have a reaction to that or whether it's something that we should give some consideration to. It's not a way I'd looked at it previously, Gail, to be honest, and it would be important to maybe connect both with the RO and our fiscal team in terms of that recommendation.
It just seems that every region has different resources and different of course, the more rural areas are in need of different programs than maybe the more urban areas are. And the comments that I've received from some families is that they would really, really appreciate it if they could actually have that local level input with and work in a partnership with the local DDRO and making some of those decisions. So, if a percentage cut needs to happen to the overall contracts in a region, that region would be able to come together and make recommendations as to where those specific cuts would happen to them based on the need of the people they're supporting. So thank you for considering the option and taking
I absolutely understand the suggestion. I just haven't heard it previously. So there's several internal constituencies that need to give due consideration to that before we can before I can have an opinion. But let's commit to take a look at that. All right. Anything else?
Thank you.
Check the chat box. Kathleen made her comment there.
Oh, wonderful. Thank you, Kathleen. So it's how do we calculate the therapeutic days in light of folks coming, bringing their loved ones home, and I think that I don't know. I'm not sure even exactly who on the team is responsible for therapeutic day leave calculations and what the relevant period of that is. Let me just give 3 beats and just ask if anybody on the team has that knowledge.
No, we do know that the providers, when they bill, they specifically identify therapeutic leave, but that's not, that would be information that we would have after the fact.
I see. Yeah, I think the question, if I'm getting it correctly, is getting at the at whether if one is capped at 96, I believe is the number, days in a relevant year, which is also a period. What year? How are the days that were accessed by virtue of people bringing their loved ones home counted against that 96? Is that fair, Kathleen? I think that's the question. I think we're demonstrating that we understand. I think I understand the question at this point. I think we don't have an answer to that. So I have, I think, 2 takeaways there. One is, and Margaret, if you'll keep me accountable and remembering to answer them, that would be fantastic. One has to do with the 96 days, and then the other had to do with, what was the other question? Oh, the FSS cuts and the role of the regional councils. Yep. Margaret, do you have any other items for discussion today?
Roger, we were going to talk about the issue that you just raised about whether or not our committee would like to formally work on discovering whether there are recommendations we could make to improve family support services. And I think you and I were speaking about what should we do about the next meeting. Should the September meeting be a meeting just of our members, not necessarily with OPW, to kind of brainstorm about this? Do you remember that?
Absolutely, and yes, I do. And so I think we would be distinguishing between, given the application of the open meetings law, I think we would distinguish between, a public facing statutory committee meeting versus an internal organizational discussion. And it could certainly be helpful to the committee, in terms of, we have a WebEx account and the ability to, to help you out there. But I would think that you all as a group may wish to develop your ideas and thoughts as a group, that without the people who you're going to make requests of, listening in on the initial conversations. I think that's a fair, if I were in your position, I might desire such a thing. We could be certainly helpful to you all if you needed some help in terms of the organizational components, but setting up the meeting or whatnot. But we could.
That would be good. Thank you. Yeah.
Well, I don't know, Margaret, if you want to have that conversation about that with the larger group, or you want to maybe take that offline with your committee. I raised that.
I was going to suggest that maybe I should send an email to the committee members to get their responses about that question, and then get back to you, because it's kind of hard to do that on this kind of meeting.
100% right, and obviously this would be the kind of conversation that would be well done in person, but
right.
Oh well.
But not this way. Okay. All right. Then I will do that.
Okay. So I think we are at the end of our agenda. Let me just give a few beats to see if there are any questions that folks may have that were not, addressed previously.
So Roger, this is Ted. I just want to make sure that we articulated Kathleen's concerns accurately. I think as I read her chat comment, there was not as much a question as there was a comment that agencies that provide residential services to a specific individual may be injured as a result of the reduction in therapeutic leave payments when a family has chosen to remove the individual from the residence and to keep them at home because of concerns about COVID transmission. And I think Kathleen's comment is correct that if that therapeutic leave were to exceed 96 days, the agency would not be compensated for a leave beyond that point. And I just want to say that I do recognize that creates a hardship for both the agency and something of a dilemma for the family. But just to go back to the points that we've made in this discussion, cuts do have the potential to disrupt services. We looked for the opportunities to minimize the possible. And I think we will be, working with families and agencies to ensure that our residential services are safe and that individuals can return back to their homes. But I just wanted to make sure we articulated Kathleen's comment.
Yeah, thank you, Kath. I think obviously we have this one-way communication right now because difficulties on the audio. Anything else? All right. Well, I just wish everybody continued health and safety, and again, I look forward to a time when we can actually, see each other. Be well, everyone. Bye-bye.